All right, I'm starting the recording now. All right. You guys ready to get started?
Yep.
Okay, Eric, do you want to let everybody in? You should be able to admit all. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Just letting a few more folks in, and we'll get started here in just a few minutes. All right, it looks like we've let everybody in from the waiting room, so we'll get started. My name is Kate Kimball, and I'm the Public Relations Manager here at Fort Collins Police. Thank you again for joining us this evening for our community conversation and information session about the School Resource Officer Program. I'm going to introduce Chief Swoboda here in a moment, but just a couple of housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded, and we'll have that available online after the fact. So if you need to duck out for any reason, or if you'd just like to go back and watch it again, it will be available online. We've also got a number of videos that were pre-recorded for this presentation. Those are individually available on our website on the school resource page, and we'll put that in the chat as well. So if you just wanted to watch a specific segment over again, or if you wanted to share with friends, family, anything like that, those are available for you. We encourage you to interact in the chat during these presentations. Our school resource officer team, as well as our partners from Restorative Justice, the Diversion Program, and the District Attorney's Office are on as well. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to enter those into the chat. And if we have some time at the end, we'll take some additional questions and kind of address maybe major themes that come up in the chat. So with that, I will hand it over to Chief Swoboda.
Thank you, Kate. Just want to make sure you can hear me okay. All right. I want to say good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out tonight to have this important conversation. You know, we have been having a lot of conversations around policing, you know, especially this past summer that I'm sure many of you have been a part of. And each one of the conversations that we've had, I believe have truly made us better. Even sometimes just hearing that people are not getting information that they want. It's information we have, but we're not sharing it. We think we are. And many times we're hearing, you know what, we need this information. And we've gotten back to them saying, well, we have that. Here's where you find it. And so even if it's not a major sea change or a policy change that, you know, people are looking for us to implement, it's made us really look back at our own efforts and say, where can we do a better job making sure that our community knows exactly what is occurring, what the facts are. Many of the conversations that are being had, there's a national lens to it, which obviously is appropriate as we're hearing and seeing all the things going on around the country. But I also think, and I'm sure you all do as well, it's really important we put a local lens on it as well. And it's important that we see some major trends that people have questions about, but then we look and say, well, what's happening inside Fort Collins? What's going on there? So that's what tonight is really all about. It's as there are a lot of questions out there. I know there have been many discussions, school board meetings, meetings in the community. I know I've attended some, even people out in front of the police department wanting to have conversations about police and school. So we really knew that tonight was a night that we wanted to have for a while. We've been planning this for a few weeks, and we'd love to be doing this in person, but as we all sit here tonight, we all know that this is the safest way in which we can all communicate. But hopefully we'll all be in a gym here in the future, in the not too distant future, we can have more conversations face to face. So I'm going to turn it over in a moment back to Kate, and we're going to go through as far as what is the lineup for today. And I know there are a variety of videos that we've put together. And I want you to know that there's many of us here in the police department right now who are going to be prepared to answer any questions and continue this dialogue. But to make sure we stayed on track, some videos were put together that answered a lot of the big questions about, who are our SROs? How are they selected? What's the discipline? What's the data showing us around when are police getting involved in making arrests inside the school? So we've captured all that, and we think this is going to be a very informative hour and a half. And we also know that this won't be the final conversation. We're hoping that this just starts even more conversations. So without further ado, I'm just going to real quick just run through who's here inside the police department in different rooms, but here to answer any questions. You've met Kate Kimball, who runs all of our social media and our press. Tim Duran is here. He's our assistant chief over our special operations, which our school resource officers fall in. We also have Jerry Schager, who is the lieutenant over in that area that supervises our school resource officers. And then specifically the SRO program itself is here as far as the sergeant, Laura Lunsford. We also have Jared Sargent's here, Keith Maynard, and Eric Weiss. So we've got a lot of people here that can answer any one of your questions. And again, very, very thankful that you all showed up here today and hoping this just starts many more conversations in the future. My last point I want to make is that when we heard all these conversations and we were having them as well, as far as, officers in the schools and what are our officers doing, I want you to know that we did a lot of self-reflection as well. We looked at what we were doing and said, you know what, while well-intentioned, police officers maybe don't need to be involved in that. We're doing it because we're adults in the school who are respected. We have great relationships with the staff and the students. But myself, Jeff, talking to a student in uniform can carry a very different message than I want it to, because this uniform represents something. And so we've heard that as well. And we've talked about uniforms. We've talked about when do our school resource officers get involved in something? And when do we go back to the school and say, you know what, that's for you all to handle. We're not getting involved in that. So I want you to know we're doing self-reflection. We're looking at how we can improve, and we want the students to feel safe, every single student to feel safe inside any school that we're in. So without further ado, I want to turn it back over to Kate. And what do we happen to do first, Kate?
First up, we're going to be hearing from Sergeant Laura Lunsford. She runs this SRO program, and she's going to be talking about hiring and training processes for SROs. And I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me for just a minute. Can you all see the video? Chief, are you able to see that?
Hey, good evening, Fort Collins community. I am Laura Lunsford. I'm the sergeant over the SRO program, and we wanted to take some time to welcome everybody back to school, even if it's under these modified circumstances. We've missed getting to interact with the kiddos and hear their stories, and so we're excited that we're able to engage with them at this point. Hey, we really wanted to take the opportunity to reach out and have some conversation with the community, because there's a lot of discussion about the SROs both on a national level and locally, and we wanted to share some of our information about the program and who we are. We are all police officers that work for Fort Collins Police Services. We have a total of 14 SROs, and we cover 38 schools. We all come from different walks of life and have various backgrounds, with many having many different careers before becoming police officers and then SROs as well. A lot of times people just see the badge and don't really know that we've lived a whole lot of life prior to that. So we have members from the LGBTQIA+ community. We have SROs that are veterans from the faith-based community, biracial families, and many, many other parts of our communities that we share commonalities with and along with our students. School resource officers is a specialty unit that you are selected for. So these are not officers that are randomly picked and assigned to do this job. They actually want to do this, so they will oftentimes take the opportunity when it comes up to put their name in. And then when we run that selection process, we run a collaborative process with PSD with several different components of that testing. We have administrators from the schools participate. We have students that help us participate in the selection process because it's incredibly important for us to get the right fit and the right SRO to meet that school's needs. Because as you guys know, every school has its own personality, and we want to make sure that we have just exactly the right fit for that. When SROs join the team, they go through a lot of additional specialized training that's specific to our unit and the mission and the needs that we have within our community and our school district specifically. This training is determined through a collaborative effort with PSD so that it meets the needs of our student population and the community at large. I'm going to talk about a few of those things on a high level, and this is certainly not an all-inclusive list, but just kind of highlights some portions of the additional training that we all receive. As SROs, when we join the team, we all attend a 40-hour basic SRO school through the National Association of School Resource Officers. They cover a lot of things from special education to FERPA to lots of things that just really are specific to the school and the culture there. We also are all CIT trained. We think that's really important because of just the nature of the adolescent brain and how things go. So we get a lot of additional training on mental health, intervention, the adolescent brain, kind of the trauma, at-risk youth trauma type training. We also do a lot of training on anti-bias, racial equality, and diversity training because we all know that we are, as our community is made up of people from all walks of life, so is our smaller student community. So nothing has changed there. We've received training on juvenile sex assault and sex trafficking training because while we live in a very safe community, we oftentimes still are confronted with some of those issues as well. Additionally, we also get a lot of victims' rights training. We want to make sure that we are offering, the right kinds of services at the right level for those individuals. We are dealing uniquely with kids from almost being adults from 18 and in the high school level all the way down to elementary kiddos, and they all fundamentally work at different levels, and so we need to make sure that we are matching their needs at their level and where they are. When we get this training, we actually go out and solicit training from a lot of our local professionals. We receive training from SAVA, Child Safe, the Child Advocacy Center. Those are our resident experts that we have here. We also work really closely with DHS, different local autism awareness places here in town, and then obviously within Poudre School District, within their mental health teams, and just countless other professionals within our community. With that training that we all receive, we provide services to 25,000+ students. So there are 14 of us at 38 different schools, and of those 38 schools, there are about 25,000 students that attend, give or take a little bit. We have officers that are in all the traditional high schools, and then we also have officers that are all contained within all of the middle schools as well. Those middle school officers then give coverage and provide coverage and service to all of the elementaries that are in town. We have found that having consistency with the same students and staff allows for us to build that rapport with the kids and for them to get to know us on a level which is really important in our community.
Good evening, parents. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm glad to get to talk with you about the School Resource Officer Unit for Fort Collins Police Services. I'm Corporal Jared Sargent. This is my second year as a corporal for the School Resource Officer Unit and my 7th year as an SRO for Poudre School District. Glad to be here to talk to you about what our unit does and how we work. We wear a lot of hats in our schools, and being a resource for the school and for the students and for the parents is a big part of that job. We often work in schools with students trying to get them the help that they need in the schools, but there are times where the resources available in the schools are just insufficient for the needs of the students and their families and their parents. We often look to community resources to help engage our students, to find them the supports they need, and ultimately the goal is to prevent them from being in the criminal justice system whenever we can do that. One of the goals for the School Resource Officer Unit is to provide the lowest level of service needed for a juvenile so that we're not over-serving juveniles, and as part of that is utilizing our community resources to help these students and their families when they're in need. A lot of the organizations we try to use in lieu of putting a kid in the criminal justice system. One of the ones I use a lot and our SROs use a lot is called the Center for Family Outreach. It's been in our community for about 20 years, And we refer kids, students, and families to this organization for a variety of different issues. When I first started as an SRO in 2014, I really started using the center for kids that were experiencing substance use issues. Oftentimes, we'd catch kids who are under the influence of marijuana or other drugs, and as an intro level of support, we might refer students to the Center for Family Outreach for Substance Abuse and Substance Use. We also refer families who are experiencing conflict through the Center for Family Outreach. They have a new grant to help families work through issues they're having in the home. We refer kids to the Center for Family Outreach for therapy. Sometimes kids and parents just need support in the home, either to communicate with each other or issues the kid might be facing, and the Center for Family Outreach has also provided support for kids experiencing that. A lot of our direct referrals, which are referrals we can make to the Center for Family Outreach without using the criminal justice system, again, are going to be for first-time substance abuse offenses or for family issues. Many of my referrals to the Center for Family Outreach were direct referrals, particularly when we had substance use issues, and we were looking for a way for kids to deal with those substance issues and also find the underlying reasons for those substance use issues. Sometimes those substance use is a way for kids to cope with other things that are going on in their lives, and the center has been great about trying to tease apart those issues so kids have a longer lasting positive impact. Another community organization that I've referred to directly is called the Child, Adolescent, and Youth Adult Connection, or CAYAC. Great thing about this agency is it serves both as a mental health provider for kids that we identify as being in high needs, and as a referral source for kids who might look for resources and mental health support in our community. I have referred a couple kids to CAYAC directly. Oftentimes, in working with counselors, we'll identify students who might need a greater level of mental health support or have no mental health support whatsoever for a variety of reasons. And we will make direct referrals for them to find the best resources for their family and for the student. I had one kid a couple of years ago who was starting to hear voices, and family had no support, didn't know who to go to, and were scared of this young student. I made a referral to CAYAC for this student, and about 3 or 4 months later, he was doing much better. The family was feeling safer, and we were able to do all of that without any criminal intervention. Colorado State University offers a mentor program called CSU Connections. When we have kids who are struggling at school, maybe struggling at home, and needing some positive mentorship, we are able to do referrals for CSU Connection as well. Oftentimes, that's going to be a group of undergraduate students who want to mentor at-risk youth, and again, provide a positive mentorship and a pro-social environment for these students to learn about appropriate behavior, mentor, or be tutored in school. So we use CSU from time to time to directly refer kids as well for mentoring and support. SROs also use the Department of Human Services program called Family Partnership. In this program, when we identify families who are having major conflicts, usually it's between a parent and the juvenile. Sometimes the parents in the juvenile are struggling. Oftentimes we'll start to identify these kids in the schools when they're running away a lot. Sometimes they might be struggling in school, and so we're trying to narrow down what's going on at home to figure out what supports they could utilize. We'll do a direct referral for family partnerships, have family partnerships get involved and contact the parents to provide additional supports, both for the parents and for the kid who's struggling. And so this is another way for us to utilize the community support in hopes that we're getting supports in place for the family before things get to a criminal level and the justice system has to be involved to ensure a better outcome. The other program that we use once a kid has been issued a summons into court is the Juvenile Recovery Court. Great thing about this is it is a treatment-based court. It is used to try and get kids who suffer from severe substance abuse and other issues treatment, continued contact with probation officers in the courts, a direct line of communication with the magistrate, as well as a team of stakeholders in the community, school resource officer, probation, pretrial, the DA's office, our public defender's office, and other stakeholders in the community so that we can get the greatest likelihood of success and greatest outcome for that kid. The next program I'm going to talk about is one that we use both as a direct referral in order to keep kids out of the criminal justice system if we can do so, and one that our diversion program utilizes pretty heavily. The City of Fort Collins has a restorative justice program, and I have used restorative justice and Restore as a direct way to get kids accountable for criminal actions without using the criminal justice system. There are times where criminal charges are deemed necessary. There's a lot of different reasons why we would pursue charges against a kid or a student. Oftentimes, we're going to look at what the severity of the crime is. Is there victim rights considerations? Does the victim want charges pressed? Is the family in need of support? In some cases, I've had parents show up and ask for additional supports because they just can't get a grasp on what's going on with their kiddo. And we decide that getting them in the criminal justice system as a way to get additional supports and some accountability is going to be the best option for the family and the best option for the student. Again, I've used restorative justice in situations where criminal summons have been issued, things like trespass, things like shoplifting, even fights, where we can get them through the restorative justice process, learn from the behavior, and hopefully make a difference in those kids' decision-making and in their lives. Those are our community programs that we utilize as SROs. I encourage you to reach out to me or any other SRO if you have questions, and appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary.
Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit today about data and juvenile-related statistics as it relates to interactions with SROs. And there's a lot of information out there that's being shared on a national level, but we probably should bring that down and talk a little bit about the local level and what we have experienced here. And so I'd like to highlight and kind of share that data and those numbers overall so that we all understand where we're at for this last year. As we drill down into this data, I know when lots of statistics are pushed out, often it can seem confusing or overwhelming to decipher everything. Please know that I'll do my very best to share the context of the information because there are so many nuances to it, to include the decisions that are made and why we do what we do. And that just can't be understood from looking at just a raw statistic alone. The information and data I'm about to go over was gathered from the published report at the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice, Department of Public Safety. And we have provided that website there for you. Also contained within that, they have pulled information, demographic information in the report, and that was taken from the Colorado Department of Education. So that will also be provided for you below on that website. In this report, it provides information for all schools that are a part of Poudre School District. You should know that there are 3 different law enforcement entities that work throughout Poudre School District. Those are Fort Collins Police Services, Larimer County Sheriff's Office, and Timnath Police Department. Fort Collins School Resource Officers provide service to 38 PSD schools. LCSO provides service to 10, and Timnath provides service to 2. During the 2018 and 2019 school year, the Colorado Department of Education listed the student population at PSD as 30,447 students. So we have a lot of students that attend those 50 schools. The resource officers assigned to those 50 schools took enforcement action on 251 incidents total. Of those 251 incidents, Fort Collins Police cited students for 219 of those offenses, and the Larimer County Sheriff's Office cited students for 32 offenses. So in terms of the overall percentage or number we took enforcement action on, of the 251 incidents out of 30,447 students, we cited at less than 1% of the student population. A lot of the current conversation centers around BIPOC or minority students and what our enforcement action looks like in those specific areas. So we want to make sure we talk about that as well. There were 97 total incidents with BIPOC or minority students charged. There were a total of 87 actual BIPOC or minority students charged because some were charged more than one time. That kind of leads to some of the nuanced parts of the discussion, which is what types of offenses are students charged with and why are they charged at all? Of the 251 incidents we took enforcement action on, they are further broken down into these categories. The Department of Public Safety website uses large buckets or categories to capture information, but there are several different laws that fit under each category. You will see categories highlighted in a few different colors. Those in red have victims attached to those particular crimes. The one in blue are felony crimes that tend to cause concern for community harm for the student population. And included in that particular bucket is distribution of drugs. The categories not highlighted, we have some discretion depending on the circumstances not to charge. While I understand the inclination at face value to say, let's let kids be kids and let's have the school sorted out, you can see through the data that there are things that are outside their expertise to handle, that are legally required to be reported, and things that need to be addressed as a whole for the safety of the entire school community. You will see the ones that are highlighted in red have victims attached to those specific crimes, as I said. Those victims and their families have rights through legislation, and we cannot usurp a victim's right to be a victim, and they have to be afforded a legal remedy. I would surmise that most parents would agree that if your kiddo were a victim of one of those crimes that were fairly significant, that you would probably want some legal intervention and that it's necessary and should take place. Again, as a reminder, the total number of incidents that we were involved and charged was less than 1% of the student population. As we come back to the question of how do things look in terms of citing BIPOC or minority students, we're going to turn our focus specifically to those percentages and numbers. As we continue to look further at the data, we need to peel back another layer, and we will do that by looking specifically at some schools. In an effort to meet the time constraints of the presentation, I will highlight just 4 schools, 2 high schools and 2 middle schools, but we will provide a breakdown of all the schools we took enforcement action at, so you can review that if you would like. As a reminder, all the data again came from the published report at the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice, and then the demographic information came from the Colorado Department of Education. As we work through this data, it's important to look at percentages, but it's equally important to look at the total number. The first one we're going to discuss is Rocky Mountain High School. We had the highest number of incidents that we took action on at this school, so it's really important for us to take a look at this data. Rocky has a student population of 2,035 students, and of those students, 26% are BIPOC or minority students. So that equates to 529 students that are BIPOC or minority. We took enforcement action on a total of 57 incidents at Rocky. Of the 57 total incidents, there were 13 total incidents with BIPOC or minority students charged. And there were only a total of 12 BIPOC or minority students charged because there was an instance where the same student was cited more than one time. So when you kind of break that data down, we cited BIPOC or minority students at a 23% for total incidents, or 22% when you account for the change based on the actual number of students. So the percentage of student population that are BIPOC or minority is 26%, 529 students at Rocky total, and we cited at 22%, which is a total of 12 students. As we shift and look at the next school, we'll look at Poudre High School, which according to the Colorado Department of Education has the largest percentage of BIPOC or minority students for a traditional high school in the district. Poudre High School has a total of 1,820 students, and of those, 34% are BIPOC or minority, which equates to 618 students. So 618 students out of 1,820 are BIPOC or minority. We took enforcement action on a total of 48 incidents at Poudre High School. Of the 48 total incidents, there were 17 total incidents with BIPOC or minority students charged. There were a total of 14 actual BIPOC or minority students charged because there was an instance where a couple of students were cited more than one time. So as we break that down, we cited BIPOC or minority students at a total of 36% based on the incidents, or at 30% when you account for the change based on the number of actual students. So the percentage of student population that are BIPOC or minority is 34%, or 618 students at Poudre High School, and we cited at 30%, which was a total of 14 students out of those 618. The next school we're going to take a look at is Lincoln Middle School, which, according again to the Colorado Department of Education, has the largest percentage of BIPOC or minority students for a middle school in Poudre School District. Lincoln Middle School has a total of 615 students, and of those students, 53% are BIPOC or minority. So that equates to 325 students out of 615 are BIPOC or minority. We took enforcement action on a total of 14 incidents at Lincoln Middle School. Of the 14 total, there were 10 total incidents with BIPOC or minority students charged. And there were a total of 8 actual BIPOC or minority students charged, because there was an instance where a couple of students, again, were cited more than one time. We cited BIPOC or minority students at 72% based on the total number of incidents, or at 58% when you account for the change based on the actual number of students. So the percentage of student population that are BIPOC or minority is 53%, or 325 students at Lincoln, and we cited at 58%, which was a total of 8 students that were BIPOC or minority. The final school we're going to talk about is Lesher Middle School. And again, according to the Colorado Department of Education, this school has the second largest percentage of BIPOC or minority students for a middle school in Poudre School District. Lesher Middle School has a total of 771 students, and of those students, 40%, or 308 students, are BIPOC or minority. We took enforcement action on a total of 6 incidents that year at Lesher Middle School. Of the 6 total, there were 4 total incidents with BIPOC or minority students charged. And the actual number was 4 BIPOC or minority students charged, with no percentage of change. We cited BIPOC or minority students at 67% based on the total incidents and students. So the percentage of student population that are BIPOC or minority is 40%, or 308 students that are BIPOC or minority. And we cited at 67%, or cited a total of 4 students out of those 308. From those offenses cited, we can further break it down. People often want to know, what does that look like if a student gets charged? So I want to kind of share some high-level overview of that process, but we have some special guests from the juvenile diversion teams that are going to share more detail on that process. If we took enforcement action, most often that process begins with the juvenile team at the district attorney's office reviewing the case for collateral information or victim or community impact statements and any other history to make decisions. So cases being considered for diversion are kept pending, which means charges are not actually filed onto a juvenile's record. They are screened with the diversion staff, who helps to create a plan of action to help them repair any harm done, learn from their offense, and gain additional coping skills. For the 2018-2019 data, over 50% of the 219 incidents that Fort Collins took enforcement action on went to some sort of diversion process. And those specific numbers below, 53% went to diversion, 9% went to municipal court or traffic tickets. Those were from the traffic incidents that we had. 36% went to regular court. That's typically done because of the type of offense that it is, or some previous history that maybe that student has had, which doesn't make them necessarily eligible for the diversion program, according to the DA's office. And then we had 2% that were considered a no-file, and that happens for various reasons. So once it's gone through that process, once a plan is identified, the student is referred then to many local specialized providers to get additional services. This is utilized kind of as an interrupter of behavior so that we can get supports in place and really just try and reach out and support that student as best as possible. This leads me kind of to the final piece of information that we wanted to talk about, which is SRO's role in discipline at schools. And I think at times the term has created some confusion because everyone has their own definition they place on discipline, especially if it hasn't really been defined for you. The definition I'm talking about today for discipline is about in-school or out-of-school suspension or expulsions. Please know that the SRO program has no say and do not give input on those issues. In fact, that is all dealt with by the administrative team at each school that makes those determinations and those decisions. For the sake of clarity, though, I wanted to kind of explain that SROs do provide adult oversight, like all other adults that are in the school buildings, to help stop unruly behavior or to have conversations with kids on how decisions they are making might lead to bigger issues. These conversations are done in an effort not to have to write a ticket for an incident and to handle an issue at the lowest possible level. So this is really just a verbal reminder, like most parents and adults give to kids, to stop an action before it gets out of hand. I hope that provides a little bit of clarity on that, because I know there's been some questions about it. And I think at this point, that kind of led us through the SRO enforcement data portion, with more insight being provided upcoming next from our guest speakers.
Hi, I'm Mary Claire Geis with the City of Fort Collins Mediation Restorative Justice Services. I'm the program specialist there. And the Restorative Justice Program originally started out in the police department. Many years ago, 20 years to be exact. Sue Mateer, who was a school resource officer, she wrote the grant that brought restorative justice, and we were originally housed under the police department for quite some time until 2013, when we merged with the mediation department, and then we moved over to neighborhood services. So what restorative justice is we bring together victims of crime, the offenders, their families, the victims' families, affected community, and everyone together talks about what happened, who's been affected, and who was harmed by a particular incident, and then develop a contract where the person repairs the harm that was caused to the victim and the community and themselves and their family. So how SROs are involved in restorative justice is they directly refer cases to the restorative justice program. Sometimes it's true diversion, so it's not even pre-ticket, and that way they are not involved in the justice system. That way the victim has a chance to speak about how they've been affected by an incident. We also get referrals with recommendations with restorative justice with through the DA's office and through municipal court. And we invite the school resource officers into our conference. Some of our victims really feel the need to be comfortable to participate. They need to have a school resource officer there as a support person. School resource officers also provide a chance to meet with them, like kind of in a more casual environment where they can do some relationship building in the restorative justice meeting and connect both the victim and the offender to school resources that are available. Some of our school resource officers have helped out with doing community service through Santa Cops and things like that when it's part of their contract. With restorative justice, one of the things that we do is when we bring everybody together is talk about how somebody has been affected by the particular events. So how they've been harmed, how it's been rippled out throughout the community. So what we do is we bring everybody together. That includes the victim, the offender, their families, the affected community, the school resource officer, and everyone is there and talking about this particular offense and how it has affected every single person. How it rippled out from the victim to the community. And sometimes it's the first time a youth is accountable. Sometimes we have multiple youth who participated in a crime and they haven't been completely honest with their parents about what they were accountable for. So with the school resource officer there and our team of volunteers of over 60 volunteers that we have in our program, we're helping the youth be accountable for their part of their crime and talk about that particular incident truthfully, because they can't blame anybody else because everybody's already sitting there in the circle. So after everyone has a chance to talk and explain how they've been affected by an offense, then we have an opportunity to create a contract to repair that harm that was caused. Some of those things could be community service. It could be They could be getting therapy. They could be writing letters of apology to the victims. They could be talking. They've gone out and talked about how theft has affected others in their community, if that was one of their offenses. And then they all come back. Everybody's invited back to a completion circle where they show their proof that they successfully completed it. If it was directly referred by a school resource officer, we let the school resource officer know that it's successfully completed, and the case is closed. And so it's a true diversion. So they don't have any charges, and they can move on with their lives.
Hi everyone, my name is Bob Persifield. I am the Chief.
My name is Carrie Bielenberg, and I work for the District Attorney's Office here in Fort Collins. We're the 8th Judicial District, so we represent Larimer County and Jackson County, and I am our diversion coordinator. So I have worked with our office for the past 3.5 years, but diversion itself has existed for over 25 years in our office. So we are a very long-standing diversion program across the state of Colorado. At this point, there are 20 of our 22 jurisdictions that actually do diversion in the state. So it's a more common program as we've grown over time. Previous to me, though, the diversion program was ran by a victim's advocate and a investigator, a DA investigator. So that is a sworn officer. What was really cool about when I was brought onto our office is we received funding specifically to have a social worker in this position. And I think this has made all the difference for youth to truly get the diversion experience and be diverting them away from the court system. So now they have the opportunity to meet with a social worker, somebody who has a background in figuring out what these youth could benefit from long-term in keeping them out of our system, and ideally never having them interact with the criminal justice system or a district attorney or magistrate or judge. So when a youth is referred to diversion, they come directly to myself or our other diversion staff who also has a social work background, and we meet with them outside of the court setting. So these youth ideally are never setting foot in a courtroom, and they are meeting with us to get to know them a little bit better, hear their circumstances, why they received the ticket or the charge that they did, and then figure out a plan to help them to be successful in not only resolving their case, but also hopefully never coming to see us again. So not only with their cases are we addressing the offense itself and why they're here to see us, but we're also coming up with plans for if they could benefit from mental health services or a coach or a mentor or tutoring with school, because truly we want these youth to be successful in all aspects of their life and again, never come back to see us in our system again. So that's kind of diversion in a nutshell. It's a very short-term program compared to court and probation supervision itself. Most youth are able to complete within 3 to 5 months their diversion commitment. And like I said, lots of mental health resources, use of restorative justice to repair the harm that's been done to the community and help them to learn bigger picture how their actions can affect other people in their lives or maybe even people they've never met before. We also help link youth to supportive services if they're struggling with substance use or even early intervention, just exposure to use or peer pressure itself. So educational classes, maybe meeting one-on-one with a counselor or a mentor or some other type of support. And then finally, school. We want youth to be successful in school. So tutoring services, connecting with their teachers or supportive people at school, whatever we can do to help them to feel supported. So in our Fort Collins schools and Poudre School District, of youth who've been cited for a crime or received a ticket, over half of them go through the diversion program. So they are ideally never entering a courtroom, having to appear before a judge or magistrate or even speak with a district attorney. So that's a huge success. So a big part of our diversion program comes with collaboration in our community as well as with our SROs. So when we receive a ticket for a youth, even if that ticket was out in the community, maybe they were breaking into vehicles or something occurred over summer break, we are reaching out to our SROs because they know our youth best. And so we're getting more collateral information about how they've been doing in school, if they've had other incidents at school that we should be aware of. Because again, our hope is that they're successful and not coming back to see us in the future. And so if we have a youth, for example, who has been breaking into vehicles out in their community, and then we reach out to school and find out, well, they're actually also struggling in their science class and their math class and could really benefit from a tutor, or their parent has been reaching out to the SRO to try and get additional resources for mental health services. We want to know that so we can help to implement those services and those supports to help the youth to be successful ultimately. Many of our cases that come through diversion do have an identified victim and even qualify for what's called our Victims' Right Act. So what that means is the victim and their family do get a say in ultimately how the case is handled within the district attorney's office, and sometimes play a role in the diversion requirements. Oftentimes we use our restorative justice program through the city of Fort Collins, where the victim themselves, or even somebody who could stand in for our victim, they do get to speak on their behalf and have a say in what our diversion youth are required to complete, or how they make amends to their community, themselves, their families, and their victim as well. It's important to also recognize that we do have victims advocates in our office who reach out to those victims and their families, and they convey what diversion requirements are going to look like, get any feedback, but ultimately at the end of the day, it is up to the district attorney's office and our district attorney in juvenile court to take into account all of those considerations in making a decision about how we handle a case. As I said, many of those cases do go through diversion. So just because we have an identified victim or it's a Victims' Rights Act case, they do not have to go to court. We're able to be creative in meeting the needs of our victim and also helping to serve our diversion youth, which is great. And we're able to do that through the resources we have in our community, as well as the support of our SROs who advocate for the diversion youth as well as the victims in their cases. So sometimes we get questions about youth who may be undocumented or have immigration status cases. That is not something that we have an ethical or legal obligation to ever notify. There's not some type of notification that goes out if a youth receives a ticket or is going through our diversion program. So it is important to recognize that, nor would we ever treat a case differently if a family were to self-disclose that that was something that they were going through or experiencing. So I think it's important to share that piece as well. It's also important to know that we cannot deny a youth diversion if they have an inability to pay fees or fines, or restitution if there's restitution owed in a case. We're very mindful in diversion. We actually do not impose fees. There are sometimes program costs, which oftentimes we're lucky in this community to utilize scholarship funds where we can, insurance if a youth is required to participate in counseling, things like that. But that will never be a reason why a youth cannot participate in diversion. It's also true for restitution. So if a youth owes restitution for a vehicle break-in, or there's some added cost to damage that was caused as a part of their case, we work with them to make a payment plan, find ways to earn extra money. But ultimately, if after that youth completes their diversion program, if there's still restitution lingering, we do not refile those cases into court. We notify our victims or our community members that they could pursue civil cases to try to get their restitution, but that's not a reason why we would file a case into court. We do our best to make our victims whole and to get restitution paid, and that certainly is an expectation up front with families, so that they need to pay that restitution, but we'll do all we can to work with them with that as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Bob Persifield. I am the Chief of the Juvenile Division at the District Attorney's Office here in the 8th Judicial District. Wanted to chat with you a little bit about kind of the court process and some of the resources that we use for juveniles who have committed crimes in our community. As you've probably heard already, we have a very prolific diversion program approximately half of the cases that come to our office from law enforcement are referred to our diversion program. What I'd like to chat about a little bit are the kids that don't go to the diversion program. Typically, those are kids where there are much more serious charges, or juveniles who have had 1 or 2 times already through the diversion program and need a little more supervision or help. Typically what that looks like is when a charge comes in or a kid is referred to court, we would file a petition in delinquency, it would open a court case, and the case would then proceed through the court process. The majority of the cases that we see that are filed end up resolving through some sort of plea agreement. Typically, if it's their first time through the court process, most of the juveniles are given what's called a deferred sentence, which is similar to diversion. So even if they don't get diversion and have to go to court, we still give them a chance to have what's called a deferred sentence. Now, a deferred sentence is a sentence where the juvenile would admit that they committed some sort of violation of the law, but instead of adjudicating them at that point or convicting them, which would be the adult version of an adjudication, we would defer making that decision for a period of time. During that time, they'd be supervised by the probation department. They would have terms and conditions they would have to follow, maybe some community service, counseling, things of that nature. And if they successfully complete their deferred sentence, their guilty plea is withdrawn and the case is dismissed. So in essence, it's similar to diversion, it's just with court supervision. Now, certainly we have a handful of juvenile cases that don't qualify for a deferred sentence, or they violate their deferred sentence and they end up being adjudicated to be a delinquent. Again, many of those cases are still left in our community. Those juveniles are not committed to the Division of Youth Services or sent to prison or anything like that. Many of those kids are then given the chance to actually be on just what's called regular probation, where they again have access to all the resources that our community can provide to them through probation and other agencies that qualify. We have a pretty low number of juveniles that we actually end up committing to the Division of Youth Services. And in those cases, those are typically kids that have committed some either very serious crimes, or they've committed a number of crimes over a period of time, and have basically gone through all the resources that we have in our community to safely keep them here without committing more crimes or creating more victims in the community. Now, the Division of Youth Services itself, it's not like sending an adult to prison where they're basically on lockdown 24 hours a day. The Division of Youth Services is also a very treatment-rich program. They're juveniles that are committed to the Division of Youth Services, have a case plan put in place by their case manager. They have education, they get counseling. There's a program that basically sets them up for reintegration back into the community. And so they're not sitting in a cell the entire time. The new legislation that's come out, Senate Bill 19-108, basically limits the number of kids or the type of kids that can be detained to kids that basically pose a serious risk of harm to the community, or juveniles that are a flight risk from prosecution. We don't typically see a lot of flight risk juveniles from prosecution, so that really leaves the number of kids that are going into detention as those ones that potentially are posing a serious threat of harm to someone in the community. That's a change from in the past when kids could be detained for being a danger to themselves. That's no longer allowed. The number of kids that we actually detain over the last year and a half really has diminished, and that's sort of a national kind of trend as well. Luckily for us, Larimer County has been really on the front edge, and even Colorado's been on the front edge of really toning down the numbers, or lowering the numbers of the kids that we actually detain, and trying to provide a more community-based service for those juveniles that are committing crimes in our community. So at this point, especially with COVID, the number of beds that were allocated at the Platte Valley Youth Services, which is the detention center that we use, currently we're at 7 beds. And if we need to borrow a bed from another jurisdiction, we can do that. I don't know that we've actually done that. We may have done it once in the last 10 months since COVID started, but it's very rare. Typically we're running around 5 kids potentially in detention. Some of those kids are have some very serious crimes. We have a couple of juveniles in that are being charged with aggravated robbery, things of that nature. So typically those are the kids that are sitting in detention. We can also use detention as a sentence for crimes when a juvenile, say, can't complete probation successfully, but it's a lower level crime. We don't want to commit them to the Division U services, and so the magistrate has the ability to sentence those juveniles to up to 45 days of jail as basically the sanction for their crime. Once they're done with the sentence, they're released and they're done with their case. There are a number of cases that aren't eligible for diversion. Those cases typically include juveniles who have used a handgun or a weapon during the commission of a crime or commit a crime of violence. Crime of violence is something similar to like a first-degree assault, second-degree assault, murder, attempted murder, aggravated robbery, things like that. And so those juveniles aren't eligible typically for the diversion program, and those are the kids that end up getting filed into court. A lot of times, again, we look at doing some sort of deferred sentence. The one thing that we really have to focus on in cases like that are the victims. We have a lot of juveniles that are committing crimes where they're creating victims, and the Colorado statutes provide those victims with certain rights, and we have to be cognizant of those rights and make sure that we're taking those into consideration when we're determining where in this process a juvenile is going to fall. A lot of the diversion cases do have victims' rights cases or victims in those cases, but we do, as the DA's office and the diversion program, reach out to those victims, touch base with them, and see kind of what their preference would be, what they would like to see happen with the case. Many times, the victims or the victims' families want to see the juvenile offender, basically get counseling or get some services in place so they don't create more victims. There are certain cases, again, crimes of violence, where we certainly have to take that in consideration and there are statutory requirements that we have to fulfill. So one other advantage that our juveniles have in this state is some of the newer legislation that's come about in the last few years with regard to the expungement of cases. So even juveniles that aren't in diversion or don't go through the diversion program but are sent through the court system and are put on probation, once they've completed their probation sentence, there's a lot of new statutes and laws in place that allow for automatic expungement of those cases. On some of the bigger cases or more serious cases, the juvenile would have the ability to petition to have their case expunged, which basically would leave them at the end of the day with no criminal history. So moving into adulthood to apply for colleges or jobs or things of that nature, the case technically then would not have existed, and they successfully completed it. The case gets expunged, and so there's really no record of it anywhere for them to have to report in the future. And so that's definitely an added benefit for even those juveniles that maybe aren't successful in diversion or weren't successful on a deferred sentence and then are supervised on probation. And even some of those cases that where kids end up getting committed to the Division U services, at some point they potentially would have the ability to have those charges and cases expunged as well. So there's a lot of different things that are in place now with the statutory laws that are coming into effect that really provide every benefit and every opportunity for a juvenile to hopefully get the services that they need, the counseling that they need, so that they can move into adulthood and be successful, productive citizens without the decisions they made as a juvenile following them and hindering their ability to be successful.
My name is Carrie Bielenberg.
All right, so those were our recorded presentations, and I see that the chat has been very busy, so we'll get to questions in just a minute, but first I'd like to hand it off to Lieutenant Jerry Schauger, who manages our School Resource Officer Unit, among other units. Jerry, would you like to share a few words?
Great, thank you, Kate. I'd like to thank everybody first for just being here tonight and taking their time to learn more about our SRO program and the way it works. I'd like to say I'm really proud of our SRO program. I think we have really good police officers in these positions. They're trained well, and they do a great job of serving our youth and our families in this community. In many ways, I think we have a model SRO program. I think that's really shown in the partnerships that we have and the other folks that have talked about all the great programs that we have that try to keep students out of trouble instead of trying to get them in trouble. This has been a difficult year for sure in a lot of different ways, and our SRO program has come under increased scrutiny this year, and we're seeing that as an opportunity to improve. There's already some things in the works that I'm excited about, And I think that we can always listen to people and listen to their criticism, and we can be better. So some of the things that are in the works right now, we have already this year worked with our PSD counterparts to write a standard operating procedure, new procedure. It really is just clarifies what the policies really are and how things should happen in the buildings. We have that many school resource officers, 14 people working in this unit out in all these different buildings. So it really does give administrators and SROs some guidelines about how they should be doing business. So some things like, it's for one thing, a commitment to non-discrimination. One of the things that we've put in this SOP is that SROs should not be involved in any kind of an immigration investigation or provide any kind of information they've gleaned from their work in the schools to immigration officials for any kind of investigation. We really believe that students and families in the school environment don't need to be worried about cops digging into their immigration status. That's just not where we want to be. And so we've clarified that. We've also clarified that minor disciplinary action should be taken by the schools without SRO involvement for many different things, even things like minor marijuana, drug use, alcohol use, those kind of things can be handled without SRO involvement. We've also clarified where students are being interviewed by either a staff member or an SRO, whether it's a criminal situation or a school administrative situation, to really make sure everybody understands what their rights are in those situations. And really reaffirmed in this SOP the desire that cases go through a diversion program, or juveniles that commit crimes are given second chances. And I think that's something that we all agree with. Some of the other things that I'm excited about, we've got the Community Advisory Council. I'm actually part of the SRO evaluation team that's part of that. This is going to give us an opportunity to look at, in a timely manner, the way cases were referred to the SROs and the way that they were handled, what discipline was given to students and what criminal charges are given in a timely manner as we go through the school year, instead of getting this conglomerate of data at the end and then trying to make sense of it. So I'm excited about that, having that kind of conversation with our PSD counterparts there. We're looking at some better data collection. We've already started some better data collection so we can know what all kinds of situations our SROs are involved in and how they became involved in those. Was it a staff request? Was it a parent request? And what the outcome was. So I think all those things are going to be really positive changes to our program already this year. Like I said, I think listening and responding to people's concerns is how we get better. And I'd like to, again, thank everybody here on this meeting tonight for being here and wanting to be a better community, whether you support the SRO program, whether you don't. I think we're all in it for our community, for the health and safety of our youth. So I'd like to turn this over back to Laura Lunsford, who's going to take, I think, one of the first questions off the list.
Hey, everybody. It's Sergeant Laura Lunsford here, and I'm going to tackle a question. I think it was sent by Lisa. It says, if safety is a big priority for SROs, how do you really accomplish that when you cover 38 schools with 14 people? And also, it doesn't seem like there is any data that you have interrupted a school shooter here. So are you really doing much for safety? And I think that's a great question. There's a couple of questions in there, so I'll kind of do my best. I'm going to break that apart and do my best to answer that. I first kind of want to talk about the school coverage part. So I can totally understand that it may not seem as safe as possible when we're not in every school. But answering it from the technical side, middle schools and high schools are viewed differently than elementary when it comes to violent acts that are perpetrated within the school. And I think that's pretty intuitive for most people. Historically, data shows when a violent act happens at an elementary school, it's done from someone who is labeled as an outsider. So that someone is a person who doesn't belong within the school and at times has no affiliation with the school. So PSD already does a really good job of having a secure campus at their elementary locations with many other features kind of put in place to keep people out.
So it eliminates most of that opportunity for violence from even entering the building at that location. Additionally, they have a closed campus and students aren't coming and going freely like they do in secondary school. So that helps to kind of keep them more as a self-contained campus as well. The needs of elementary schools is much different than high schools and middle schools. So it makes sense to give them support as needed when we are called, but rather than being there and housed there full time. When we talk about middle schools and high schools, the historical data looks very, very different when it comes to violent acts. When a violent act happens at those schools, it's primarily is done by someone that we label as an insider or someone who actually belongs at that school, and that we usually wouldn't question their presence on campus. It's compounded because they do have the open campus, and it's situations where students are coming and going all day long and have much more freedom to kind of roam the building all day. This is often why it's difficult to stop someone before an initial act of violence takes place, because I know that's a concern. Why can't you just stop it from happening? And that's part of the problem. The needs of secondary schools becomes much higher the older the student population gets. Some of those students are often involved in the same risky behavior and activities that adults are, and they have a much larger population, so it makes more sense for us to be housed full-time in those locations. For the second part of that data, to support kind of stopping a school shooter, do we have any data that kind of supports stopping a school shooter here in our district? Becomes a little bit more difficult to quantify. For the 2018-2019 school year, I can tell you that we had 43 safe details that came in that safe detail labeled as threats or planned school attacks. This number would not include any information, obviously, that came to us directly from people as SROs on site. So that's just the safe detail data that I'm kind of referencing there. When we get information like that, we've got to treat all threats as if they are real until we can prove that they're not, because we don't get a do-over on that if we get it wrong or just dismiss it without doing our due diligence to investigate it. You can see from the data that was published from the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice Public Safety website that I went over with you guys earlier, that we cited 8 students for interference with schools or making threats. So as you can, so it's not as if we're not seeing some issues and handling those issues when they come up. As you can imagine, though, it just becomes really hard for us, again, and I know I've said it a couple times, but to quantify or capture, especially if we intercede when a student's kind of testing waters or boundary probing with certain behaviors. And our goal is actually to stop the violence before it occurs, and in particular, stop a kiddo from following through with the decision to act on those thoughts of violence. That's why we work really hard once we get that information to get wraparound services in place for kiddos that are engaged in that behavior. I'm not sure that we would ever know or that I could ever give you a true number that when kids make threats, that they would have 100% followed through with it unless they come back later and tell us they were going to until we stepped in. So as you can see, it's just really hard to capture that data in a nutshell to talk about safety, but certainly you can see from some of the data and from the information I'm sharing with you tonight that, that we have had that. And these situations, that's exactly what brought Claire Davis, the Claire Davis Act kind of to rise here in the state of Colorado, that they wanted to make sure that schools and PSD in particular were able to share their burdens with law enforcement as the subject matter experts when it came to school violence and threats. I know this is kind of a deep and heavy subject and not one we often want to think or talk about, but they're not really capable of going out and doing those thorough assessments in the home or to kind of capture some of that other data. So I know that kind of, I've thrown a couple things in there and we can always add some more information later to clarify that. I want to kind of talk about in generic terms of safety, not school shooters. We've certainly stopped some escalating situations from becoming worse or more violent by our presence and intervention. Issues that come up at school because we're dealing with human beings and emotions, from heated custody exchanges to unwanted parties trespassing on the school property. And I don't think it's realistic or that we should expect to burden that school staff with confronting people in those situations. That's not their expertise, and it really puts them at unnecessary risk of potential harm. So yes, I believe we certainly have made the school and staff much safer by our presence on campus. And I hope that kind of answers the question that you had, but if not, we'll follow up with you again later. It was a great question though, because we're asked that a lot about how we can transition between the schools and why we put staff where we do. I think we're going to move on to the next question, and I think Chief Swoboda is going to answer that one.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I ticked off you as well as we're trying to go through this. I just want to assure anyone, any question we don't answer, we will make sure that we write out all the questions that were here and give a response, and we will then post that. And if you'd like it emailed directly to you, we can do that. Otherwise, well, I'm assuming, and Kate handles this, but we probably put it on our transparency page or as an addition to this video once we start putting it out. So there were a couple that popped up that I was asked to hit on. One of them talked about areas of improvement. You know, we have an amazing group of school resource officers, but it doesn't mean we can't get better. And it doesn't mean we can't do a better job communicating. And so I would say that how can we get better is continue to listen, continuing to, you know, over communicate. What are our officers working on? You know, some of this information, it might be the first time you've heard this, as far as Lieutenant Schager hit on, you know, a new standard operating procedure that's going to explain, you know, that we're not going to be getting involved in things that maybe in the past we did. Again, as I mentioned before, it might have been well-intentioned, but the police have no business being involved in it. So we're going to step away from it and turn more things over to the school. So I do think that there's a lot of room for improvement, just because we're all constantly learning and you know, questions are being asked. So the biggest thing I think we can do is communicate better. And also, there's probably gonna be a lot of questions on data. And as I was kind of scanning some of the chats, we don't have just, you know, absolute robust data. There are some questions that are being asked that we probably say, okay, yeah, we have to figure out how can we get that data. So continue to kind of refine what data we have so that we can, you know, make some decisions and answer questions better. I think that's going to be really important. So I'd say data, better job listening, and then over communicating, I think, are areas of improvement. One question came up: if canceled, how quickly could we spin this back up? I think there are experts probably that could answer this, but I can tell you as the chief of police, not very easily. If we were told, you know, not to come back to school, those officers would be reassigned and just all of a sudden saying, okay, let's have them back in, you know, next month or next week, you know, that would be very difficult. So I don't have a specific answer as far as 2 months, 3 months, but when we're not in the schools, there are still many calls for service around the community that involve kids. And so that our school resource officers handle daily and many times are able to figure out what's going on. And so an officer on the street doesn't have to respond to take a police report. So kind of a long answer to say we wouldn't be able to spin it back up very quickly, but we don't have a good answer on how long that would take. And then I think I had one more here. How come we don't ask the parents? And then somebody else said, how come we don't ask the kids as far as if people want the school resource officer program? In the end, I want to be very clear. The police department, Fort Collins Police Services, works for the community. The community is our boss. The community is the one that decides our priorities. Now we have some professional judgment and things that we say we need to be working on, you know, these issues because we're seeing trends or there's crime and violence, you know, around the city. So we do that. However, we are invited in from the school district. So if, again, as everyone knows, if it's the school district said, you know, don't show up tomorrow or next week, then we wouldn't show up. As far as asking the schools, or I'm sorry, as far as asking the parents, we don't have access to all of the parents. You know, we've talked about doing that, you know, just on a social media site asking. However, just know that we would completely support. You know, the school district has, you know, contact for, you know, emails and phone numbers for every parent that's out there, every family. And we would welcome that information. Be very interesting to learn what percentage of parents in the school district like having police officers in the school and what percentage don't. I think that'd be very interesting, but we're not stopping that from occurring. And we just don't have the mechanism, you know, the information to go out and be able to survey whatever, how many households that would be for the 25,000 or so students. I'm now going to turn it over to Kate. Who was next? Was it Jared? I thought one of the school resource officers was going to talk a little bit.
Yes, we've got a couple folks lined up next, but I did want to let folks know that I have posted the web link in the chat for the SRO page on our website. So if you want to access the videos from tonight and as well as the Q&A that we'll capture and then we'll put responses to on, you'll be able to access them there as well. So that website again is in the chat. It's fcgov.com/police/school-resource-officers in case anybody's calling in and doesn't have access to the chat. We will make sure those are available. There's some amazing questions in the chat and it's really exciting to see this many people joining the meeting and engaged in this conversation. So the next person I'm going to hand it off to is Corporal Keith Maynard. Keith, I believe you had.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. Hi. Hi, I'm Keith Maynard. I'm a corporal for the School Resource Officer Unit. I want to reiterate what the chief said. Thank you so much for tuning into this. We love having discussions. This is my 7th year as a school resource officer. My 2nd year as a corporal. And I'm just so proud to be a representative. A little bit about my background. This is my 25th year as a police officer. I do have a degree in sociology with a focus in criminology. School resource officer is a great job. And I just wanted to reassure you parents out there that any one of my school resource officers, including me, we would do anything for your children. We would do anything for them, including giving my life for them. So I just want you to know that and just be reassured that in this times that we're having that we're here for you and we're here for your kids, and it comes down to that. It really does. I was asked to answer a couple of the questions in the chat. There are some questions about like what would schools look like if there were no school resource officers in them? What if I'm a victim of a crime, or could that money be better spent somewhere else? And so I'm going to be brief, but I'm going to kind of address that question for you tonight. So basically, what would happen if there was no school resource officer and a crime occurred in the school? So would we respond? Of course we would respond. As the chief said, we are here for you. We work for you. And so of course we would respond. But there's a couple of differences. You would get patrol officers, and we at Fort Collins, I'm very proud to say we have very highly trained police officers. Our patrol officers are generally, not all the time, but generally the newer police officers in the building. It's usually their first assignment. So you would get a police officer, and a patrol officer's job is to really prioritize their calls. And so depending on what it was, if somebody stole, let's say, a bike from the bike rack at one of the middle schools, that might not get an officer for a couple hours, maybe, depending on what kind of day it is and what was going on in the city. So you would get a police officer, but they might have a different skill set, and I'll kind of talk about that here in a minute. But say you were a victim of a crime, of course we would go to the schools, and we have to go to the schools. And there's four things I want to outline for you here today that we have to respond. And so the schools, we would have to be there. The schools couldn't not call us. They have to call us. The first one is if it's a victim's rights crime. The legislator says, and it's very well documented, that if you're a victim of a certain crime, you have rights as a victim. And some of those crimes are third-degree assault, sexual assault. It could even include sexting and sexting type cases, harassment, domestic violence. Those are just some of the victims' rights crimes where if you're a victim of a crime, the police department has to be called, and we have to offer you services. We get you in touch with a victims' rights advocate. You're entitled to compensation and things like that. And that's written in the legislator that we have to respond to those calls. So whether we were in the school or not, we would have to call and take a report from that person, and then offer them, as they should, the victims' rights pamphlet and everything that goes around with that. The second thing in a school is called the Claire Davis Act. And if you've been around Colorado for a while, you know the tragedy that happened in 2013 at Arapahoe High School, where Claire Davis was unfortunately shot and killed. Out of that came legislation and came the Claire Davis Act. And basically what the Claire Davis Act says that the schools, specifically the schools, have a reasonable care to protect students, faculty, and staff from reasonably foreseeable acts of violence. So what does that mean? it means that the school has to, and it's not kind of will, it's shall. The school has to collaborate with mental health, with police, with different people in the school, with teachers, with counselors. They have to collaborate and talk if there is some kind of threat going on in the school. And so that the Claire Davis Act covers assaults, serious sexual assaults, threats to the schools. And basically what it says is all the adults have to talk and make sure they can do whatever they can to intervene before it happens. And so that came out of the tragic school shooting at Arapahoe High School. But again, that's one of those mandated things that we as the police department have to collaborate on. And it says that in the Claire Davis Act. The third thing is mandated reporting. So if a student is a victim of child abuse or child sexual abuse, something like that, the school is a mandated reporter. So they have to call the police, they have to call the Department of Human Services. And actually, I talk to my schools all the time about, hey, when should we call not call? Is this a victim's rights crime? Is this a mandated reporter crime? And we collaborate about that. And sometimes it's no, that doesn't fall under that. You guys can handle it. And sometimes it is, yes, you are mandated reporters. You have to talk to me, and I will report this to the Department of Human Services and start that ball rolling. That can have huge liability consequences for the school if they don't. It also can have criminal consequences if the administrator doesn't report a mandated reporting crime. They can be subject to criminal liability as well as other kinds of liability, right? And so it's just one of those things where we talk about it all the time with administration and make sure that we're making the right decisions for the kids. The fourth thing that kind of gets overlooked is if you're a victim of a crime, you have the right to call the police department, and you can call them whenever you want to. So if it is a bike theft and the school says, hey, we just want to solve this by getting people together or some kind of restorative justice, and that student or that parent says, no, I want to call the police and report this to the police, they have the right to do that. So just remember that that's kind of the four things that fall into why a school would have to involve the police department in something. And remember what I said before about a patrol officer or a school resource officer. Remember that a school resource officer, I worked with your child when I was in middle school. I worked with your child for 3 years. And then they go to my high school. So then I work with them for 4 more years. So I have a lot of time building that relationship and building the relationship with the parents and the student. And so I look at it like this, it's a quality of service. I have a month to help you with whatever happened. I have a year to help you with what happened. I have maybe 2 years to help you and to help your child learn or just figure out what they did and to better their lives, to instill some ethics and some honor, right? So just remember that as a quality of service, our patrol officers will come in, and if there's a fight, let's say, they might just come in for 15 minutes and say, hey, did you hit this person? Did you hurt this person? Okay, you both did. I'm going to call your parents, and you both get tickets, and then I'm on my way. Whereas school resource officers, we have the time and we have the luxury to get to know you and your family and your students and the administration and the family dynamics, and just be able to solve that problem for you, because that's who we work for, right? And we have specialized training, and I know that they've gone over it. We know the school dynamics. We have CIT training. We have just regular SRO training, trauma-informed training, just PSD, what teachers have to go through, their kind of training and stuff like that. So in essence, it's time and relationships, and that's what we're about. We're about that community policing, and I really think that being a school resource officer is kind of a grassroots effort for community policing. We are able to talk to and to develop relationships with generations of families here in Fort Collins. And that's wonderful. There's one of our school resource officers, Dawn Johnson. I'm sure many of you may know her out there. I couldn't walk anywhere working a job with her, like at New West Fest, without somebody saying, Officer Dawn, and just talking about you were my SRO. And this is like a 30-year-old person, right? And so that's the kind of relationships we want to have with our citizens. And so I'm here. We're invested in your kids. We really are. And like I told you when I started out, that we would do anything. Any one of my police officers would do anything for any one of your kids. And I just want to reiterate that. And I'm always open to conversations. And if you know me, you know that you can always email me, or you can always come and sit at my desk. We might not agree on something, but I always want to have that conversation with you. So thank you so much for your time tonight. You are a great community to police. I couldn't be more proud of our city. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you, Keith. One of the amazing things that we have here in Fort Collins, and it's something that we certainly don't take for granted, is the partnerships we have within our community, not only with our community members, but with the business community, with our nonprofit community, with our faith community. And in the lens of tonight, we've got some great partnerships with our folks over in restorative justice, as you saw, with the district attorney's office. And so next, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Bielenberg to talk a little bit and maybe answer a question or two as it relates to the diversion program. So Carrie, if you were there, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kate. All right, you can hear me okay? Perfect. So as Kate mentioned, I'm Carrie Bielenberg with Diversion. You saw my video earlier. Thank you all for the amazing questions you've put in the chat. I think we're all excited to be able to, take some time and answer the ones that we weren't able to go ahead and answer already. And so look for that for sure. I did want to hop on just to speak a little bit more about the school threats to violence cases and the citations. Looks like restorative justice did hop on. Thank you for that. Just speaking to sometimes how those cases are handled. So anecdotally, this will be information that we mine through and get you more concrete answers, hopefully tomorrow. But the majority of those cases are referred to restorative justice, whether that's directly with a referral, or they go through our diversion program and are completing restorative justice, or even worst case scenario, they actually do appear in juvenile court and restorative justice is a condition of their programming there. It really depends on the circumstances themselves of the case and kind of the severity of the impact. But what I can say is anecdotally, a lot of those cases actually do go directly to restorative justice without any citation, or with citation through our diversion program. So I hope that that helps speak to that question in particular and our use of restorative justice. I know that that has been a popular topic on the chat, and we're very lucky in this community that we do have our restorative justice program, that they handle such a wide range of cases. We rely on them heavily, whether it's through direct referrals from our SROs, as Jared Sargent had spoke to, through diversion, or even through juvenile court if they actually go all the way through that process. So thank you so much again. Like I said, I'm excited by the questions you all asked and looking forward to being able to get you more answers soon. Thank you.
All right, we are about at time, so I'm going to hand it off to Lieutenant Jerry Schager one more time to wrap up. And again, thank you all so much for being here this evening. Great conversation. We look forward. This is really just, it's not the end of the conversation. It's an ongoing discussion, and we appreciate you being part of it. So Jerry, you can wrap it up.
Thanks, Kate. There is a question Johanna, my friend Johanna, has asked in the chat. Basically, do I think we should have officers in our schools? And I think absolutely we should. I think our police officers make schools safer. Is the right number 14? I don't know that. When 2 years ago, when we had some school shootings, we had people lining up at the podium at city or at the school board wanting police officers in all of the 40 schools. And we did not support that. We didn't think there was a need for that. But I do think police officers in schools that get to know the students, get to know the staff, really have the pulse every day on that school campus, do keep that school safer. And also, as far as she asked a question about bias and how we deal with bias in the program, I think bias is all around us. And I think those of us in positions of authority, be it a police officer or a supervisor at work or a politically elected person, we all have a responsibility of trying to filter out our bias from the decisions that we make that impact people's lives. And I think our officers do that well. I don't think we'll ever be perfect. We are imperfect human beings like everyone else. But I think that we do a good job of policing those communities and really helping people stay out of trouble. And that's really what it's all about. So again, I'd like to thank you for being here tonight. We will clean up the questions that remained if we didn't get to them. But look for more on this conversation because it's going to continue. So thank you again for being here.